As the Money Burns is an original podcast by Nikki Woodard. Based on historical research, this is a deep exploration into what happened to a set of actual heirs and heiresses to some of America's most famous fortunes when the Great Depression hits. Each episode has 3 primary sections. Section 1 is a narrative story. Section 2 goes deeper into the historical facts. Section 3 focuses on contemporary, emotional, and personal connections. Story recap. While Barbara Hutton's aunts plan her big debut, Doris Duke scores the ultimate debutante activity, curtseying before the King and Queen at Buckingham Palace. But is she ready for all that comes with it? Now back to As the Money Burns. The Deb's Delight. A royal debut comes with more attention and activities. The most awkward and least likely debutante is on her way to becoming the most celebrated of this season. Section 1, Story. Exiting the throne room at the court of St. James, tall and awkward teenage heiress Doris Duke walks through Buckingham Palace onto the next event. An evening of parties and dances and endless celebrations. A whirl of fun and play. Queen Charlotte's Ball, which was originally part of the court's presentation, is held this year 2 weeks later on May 31st. And the press, back home, Doris is in all the papers announcing her court presentation, speculating on her sizable fortune and often including her photo. The mail is piling up. Thrilled at the influx of potential offers, her mother, Alen Duke, closely guards her to make sure she doesn't fall for the wrong man or cause some other social blunder to ruin her newfound popularity. Every fortune hunter will now be in full force, coming after Doris. All the attention and somewhat acceptance is a very heady experience and somewhat soul-crushing for Doris. Rounds and rounds of socializing in dull and restrictive environments. So rarely a break from proper etiquette and protocol. Alen loves it all, while Doris can barely tolerate it. However, even with all the social functions, Doris manages to fit in music lessons, taking advantage of different set of teachers to expand her abilities. She never performs for others like some Debs do. She is far too shy to share her deepest passion that way. Alen hovers around a bit like the cat that ate the canary, completely smug and satisfied over her social coup. Of course, this now means she will need to throw Doris an adequately lavish debutante ball. Really a complete waste of money for what should go to her son Walker. The price of success. In the heady rush of the London season, Doris runs across her last summer companions from Newport. Meeting up with the Van Allens is a thrill as Henry Van Alen advises her on all the best jazz clubs in the London area. Their mutual love of music always a bridge of connection, and his approval carries weight in this aristocratic world. The newly married Henry with his wife move about in the highest circles along with brother Sam Van Alen, who seems smitten with Elizabeth Betty Kent, the daughter of radio magnate Atwater Kent from Philadelphia, who also bowed at court the day before Doris. They invite Doris to join them for an evening at the Embassy Club, a spot so hot that it is harder to get in than being presented at court. Henry charmingly explains to the hesitant Alen, "It's the most exclusive club in town, a favorite of the smart set. The prince frequents regularly." Alen scowls at the thought of Doris dancing with that playboy Russian prince, Alexis Divani. Henry winks at his brother Sam. Any girl spotted dancing with the Prince of Wales becomes instantly popular. Sam nods in agreement. Alen isn't quite sure what he means. Henry teases Doris could end up a princess by the end of the season, and Alene's face lightens up considerably. What a wonderful idea, as long as it is a true prince. Not like that Russian prince, Alexis Divani, who is already too close to home with his Van Alen affiliations. Either Van Alen brother are acceptable, of course. Alas, Henry is now married, but younger brother Sam would do nicely as well. However, their perpetual penniless house guest is undesirable. A title with no fortune is completely useless in Alene's eyes, and now there's even a bigger glut of such destitute former royalty. Such a funny disposition, being that Alen so overly prides herself as descending from southern plantation owners, who also ended up penniless after the Civil War. Only she later married into extreme wealth from basically redneck hicks. When it comes down to it, Nanaline is first and foremost about money, then rank. While Nanaline would normally abhor Doris going to any nightclub, the social climbing mother could hardly allow Doris to miss out on the opportunity to mingle amongst royalty. It is the premier exclusive night spot for London's highest echelons, with an extremely limited guest list and far too pricey for poorer aristocrats. Out of earshot from Nanaline, Henry conspiratorially assures Doris, "You got the same glassy-eyed dread Louise gets when she's had too much stuffy socializing. Don't worry, this will be marvelous. What's your Deb's delight?" The Deb's delight, the British slang for a good-looking, unmarried man from similar desirable social background. The best of debutantes have a choice of men vying for marriage. Now, with her royal presentation, Doris has definitely upped her social and therefore marital profile. It seems amongst the wealthy that the fortune hunted often become title hunters. Could she really now have her pick of any young man? I hope you know the foxtrot. Prince David loves American jazz, has his own collection with a phonograph in Buckingham Palace. His brothers, the Duke of York, the Duke of Gloucester, and Prince George also enjoy jazz and the Embassy Club. The Embassy Club, after all, is a jazz club favoring American musicians, and the Prince of Wales favors it himself. The club is indeed exclusive, only 250 tables with a grand orchestra band and a large dance floor. It is paradise for those wanting to rub elbows with the elitists of the elite, with no riffraff, so to speak. Okay, some starlets get into. The only experience missing is Luigi, the beloved Italian maitre d' who suddenly passed away only a few weeks earlier. The music and band plays on. On the dance floor, ruggedly handsome Russian Prince Alexis Divani makes his rounds stringing along several potential heiresses, though he seems to favor a spicy blonde, who in actuality is his true love, Sylvia. Louise Van Allen would be furious, and Barbara Hutton elated if they saw the pair dancing, though all other eyes are firmly more curious about another pair in attendance that evening. The charming and most wanted bachelor in the world, David, the Prince of Wales, who almost became King of England last year upon his father's grave illness, rushing back from an African safari to be on the ready. Shortly after the last annual Sandringham Christmas holiday, the Prince of Wales took off again on a 3-month-long big game hunting expedition to resume the one previously interrupted. The trip was well documented by the camera, but one detail was not so prominent. He was not truly alone, as he had accompanying him Thelma Furness, his married lover. She had thrown his going-away party in London at her Grosvenor Place home, then joined him a month later. Tonight again, Thelma is with her suntan prince. It is clear his adoration for her. It is quite a scandal, really, but he hardly cares. He pulls her out on the dance floor for a foxtrot. The Prince of Wales is indeed a fine dancer. The warm and friendly debutante Betty reveals he's into wildlife conservation. His recent trip was a first of its kind, a photo safari. Instead of bringing back dead animal pelts, he brought back photos and footage of live ones. Sam watches the other lesser prince, his close friend Alexis, on the dance floor. Fortune, title, power. What's the point of the first two when you don't have the last? Betty sadly sighs. There's a huge difference because one day Prince David will have power. For now, he's wanted for the promise of what will be, never for himself only, a trophy to be collected like those wild beasts. Doris takes it all in. She has all the money in the world and yet very little power to make important decisions, at least not for several more years. Instead, Doris is a pawn in Nanaline's social game to help Walker. For the moment, Doris is desperately trying to win her mother's approval. Only Doris is also strong-willed and slightly rebellious. Her newfound celebrity might make her bolder. When Doris and Nanaline eventually board the Mauretania to return to the United States at the end of June, they are both counting on a big change in Doris's profile. Section 2, History and Historiography. Back in the United States, a lot of the press covered the Buckingham Palace event where 17 Americans were presented to the King and Queen of England. All over details came out, and the North Carolina newspapers proudly featured their very own Doris Duke's triumph. Details even mentioned about the limo creeping in the mall, but they didn't point out that it was actually Doris. Doris had always been the subject of news since her birth, announcing her as the richest baby. By age 10, she started receiving marriage proposals, at least a dozen or more a month. Most would be drawn and repelled by her significant fortune. Her lower social status impeded certain more elitist matches as desired by Alen, who wanted a marriage that would establish both status and fortune. If Doris married well, then she wouldn't need her inheritance, which could then be transferred to non-Duke heir Walker. Yes, Alen plotted against her daughter for that very reason. Doris was always an obstacle and splinter in her mother's eyes. Now, with such a boost in profile, those who would have snubbed Doris for lack of status might overcome their hesitancy after the crash hurt, if not completely took out, several fortunes. The damage to Doris's own was merely a bump, as her father, Buck Duke, had made more stable investments across multiple trusts. With everyone reeling from their losses and economic fears, the public became even more fascinated in the lives of the rich. Now, with this rarest of honors, Doris Duke is front and center during her debutante season. From the announcement of the Court of St. James presentation on April 29, 1930, through her appearance on May 15th and the following day, endless news articles feature the story as well as continue to refer in future ones about her. Now, other ladies, including and naturally Atlanta Constitution publisher Mrs. Clark Howe, received her own press coverage. She skipped out on an important publishing event when she received word that she had gotten one of the few select spots. Over 300 Americans applied for the honor, of which only 17 were chosen. Howe, a comic that appeared along with Will Rogers' syndicate article on the event, blatantly stated it was the size of their bank accounts that had gained admission. You can see it via @AsTheMoneyBurns on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. In his article, Will Rogers discusses the young ladies who were presented and the pride it must be for their dynastic families. He points out their appearances like almost an ad for their affiliated companies and industries involved. Campbell's Soup metallic cans for Charlotte Durrance, the radio, Elizabeth Betty Kent, cigarettes, Doris Duke, and Atlanta has representation, though not for Coca-Cola. Rogers seems incensed that merit and achievement had nothing to do with the selection requirements, but merely money. He mocks that all these girls do is curtsy to the Queen, who doesn't even speak to them. Thus, the whole event is completely pointless while the men wear odd, silly costumes. Doris will end up with an even bigger problem. Now everyone is looking at her, and the debutante activity is meant to help solicit marriage proposals, which she will, in abundance from all sorts of sources. It does and doesn't help that the news articles with her often mention her sizable fortune, estimating anywhere from 50 to 100 million, and the label, richest girl in the world. The inclusion of her photo and mention of her fortune could be simultaneously considered a for sale sign, a wanted poster, or worse, a target. At the tender age of 12, Doris had already learned shortly after her beloved father's death that she received a lot of mail. A vast majority were pleas for money and telling of hard times. Enough hurled accusations and threats of bodily harm or kidnapping, and several included actual death threats. That was during the plethora and good times of the Roaring Twenties. Can you imagine what might come in now during the Great Depression? With new technology, they had newsreels and photographs, so anonymity was fleeting. Doris might survive a few days, maybe a couple of weeks, but inevitably, her true identity would be exposed. Still, for the good press, Doris relished some of the attention, no matter how much she claimed otherwise. Secretly, she kept a series of scrapbooks of press clippings. Even more, she kept one with press on Barbara Hutton to compare how they both fared. For the time being, Doris seems to be winning. Then there's the ultimate trophy, a handsome prince in line for the throne. Prince David could have his pick of anyone, yet he prefers married women with ramifications rippling outwards. It is this scandal and more like that will soon cause huge troubles for current mistress Thelma Furness's identical twin sister, Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, who will find herself in a bitter public custody battle over her daughter, Gloria Vanderbilt, the sometime playmate of little Cobina Wright Jr. Doris's Newport neighbors, the Vanderbilts, are intent on keeping little Gloria away from her wayward mother, who often joins Aunt Thelma partying in Europe. Furthermore, when this prince becomes King Edward VIII, he will cause an even greater scandal over the love of another married woman and end up exiled and impoverished, only left with the title Duke of Windsor. It can get quite confusing as to who are the hunters and who are the hunted in this game of fortune and love. Section 3, Contemporary and Personal Relevance. I think this is a good moment to discuss the concept of celebrity back then and now. Doris Duke, Barbara Hutton, and other heirs and royalty were well documented by the press, and with that, praise, criticism, and scandal. While at first favorable, over time, the elusive Doris would piss off select reporters. Can you really blame her if every time her name is mentioned, they almost always say how much money she has? Especially during the Great Depression? She was already the target of kidnapping and death threats before the crash. Today, we are more accustomed to the media cycle of adulation followed by destruction than redemption arcs that follow most celebrities. Of course, we have someone currently playing all the cards and trying to keep as much attention as possible. That is, of course, Meghan Markle. She married Prince Harry with a slew of loving, adulating press. He was, after all, like his great-uncle, the most eligible bachelor if a little further down the line of succession. After her wedding, the criticism began. Then the couple stepped down from royal duties, and it became a free-for-all. Were they oppressed or only trying to live their best lives? Or are they opportunists, playing what celebrity cause du jour from money and attention? Time will tell. Then there's the whole other matter of press and today's social media circus. Once things are out there, can they really be truly left behind, even after one is long gone? Parallels to today's former royals leaving have caused modern discussion and re-examination of Queen Elizabeth II's uncle and Prince Harry's great-uncle, King Edward VIII, the later Duke of Windsor. The latter, of course, was a far larger abdication as he was the reigning monarch, and his abdication paved for the way for the current Queen's reign and line of succession. However, the Duke of Windsor and his twice American divorced wife, Wallis Simpson, would go on to live a more demure life of minor celebrities. Occasional press, always favorable to the reigning royals, though their exile was harsh in other senses. It was a difficult financial adjustment to live out, and that was all pre-internet, and Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, with the barrage and bombardment of commentary and unfiltered news. Anyone can watch, review, and comment on the happenings. During the pandemic, with a more concentrated and limited celebrity news due to lockdowns, there were nearly weekly or bi-weekly coverage of today's former royals and every micro moves and blunders. Makes one wonder what is truly newsworthy and sacred. Want to hear more of the jazz and great band music of the 1920s and 1930s? You should visit Past Perfect Vintage Music. It has a large, wonderful collection of digitally remastered music. Their collection was even featured in The King's Speech, the Oscar-winning film which covered the abdication crisis surrounding King Edward VIII and his stuttering brother and successor, King George VI, Queen Elizabeth II's father. Both kings and their brothers were fans of jazz and would no doubt love this collection. Maybe there could even be a royal fan inside the family today. Check out Past Perfect via their website, www.pastperfect.com. Speaking of the Duke of Windsor and the glory of music and entertaining, come see how they connect with the first two Waldorf Astoria hotels. My two webinars will be live, Part 1 Wednesday, June 16th and Part 2 June 17th at 5:30 Eastern and 2:30 Pacific. Replay available for 1 week. Links available at New York Adventure Club, www.nyadventureclub.com, and the event page at asthemoneyburns.com. Next, when we return to As the Money Burns, while heiresses contend with debuts, heirs must focus on school, graduation, and university. Will the pressures of exams cause one heir to crack? Until then. As the Money Burns is an original podcast written, produced, and voiced by Nikki Woodard, based on historical research. Archival music has been provided by Past Perfect Vintage Music. Check out their website at www.pastperfect.com. Please come visit us at As the Money Burns via Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Transcripts, timeline, episode guide, and character bios are available at asthemoneyburns.com.